Hello and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. Just want to kind of wrap up my discussions on Kumite that we've been going through lately, and just my version and just my ideas. So, if you have any of your own ideas, and some of them are pretty esoteric, I understand that, no big deal. Maybe the word Kumite to you means sport. To me, as I said previously, it's another aspect of our training. It's the third aspect of our training, the major third. We have three major aspects that we use for training: kata, kumite, and kion. Kion is basic, and of course kata is forms, techniques put into sequence, if you like. And kumite is, of course, sparring, if you like, but it can also mean competition, and we should also be using competition as a form of training. And that's about all it is. It's not going to make you the best in the world. It's not going to make you the best fighter in the world or invincible or anything like that. As I previously mentioned, the attitude of a fighter is determined mentally, and the attitude of somebody who's defeated by a fighter is also determined mentally, mostly. All right? I know if you get a fierce attack and it absolutely disables you physically, then you can't continue. It probably hasn't changed your mind, but you just physically can't continue. However, there's points before that when people are able to continue and maybe even get success from a confrontation if they had the right mindset. And this is generally what it takes. As I mentioned before, I'm from Liverpool, and anybody there will tell you that if somebody gets the name of a nutter or a madman in a fight, you generally leave them alone. Now, that doesn't mean to say that that person's a great fighter. In fact, they may not have any kind of training whatsoever. Most street fighters don't, okay? They're either just very good with timing, they're athletic, or they're big and strong. Now, they're not all bullies. I've seen some good street fighters, and a lot of them have gone into the martial arts and gone on to be law-abiding citizens and protective of other citizens, working the doors and in security and stuff like that. In fact, some of the best human beings I know. Really nice people, gentle people, nicely spoken, good manners. And they work as bouncers, if you like. It doesn't mean to say they're violent, but they know how to handle themselves. And basically, it's usually a mental attitude. And as I said before, there's a difference between prey and predator. And mostly the difference is in what you're willing to do to not be prey. Now, and I said before in my self-defense courses with women, I tell them that your most powerful weapon is your voice. And this is true. I mean, I'll be honest with you, if you look at statistics, most people succumb or submit to verbal abuse before anything gets physical. They get shouted at or threatened or horrified by whatever their attacker is saying, and they'll just submit. Now, the attitude that martial arts tries to foster is something that will stop you from submitting and to use your voice against them. Make as much noise as you can, okay? Fire the insults back in your face as loud as in their faces as loud as you can and as often as they can. I'm not saying get into a verbal argument, because that doesn't work. You're not going to change anyone's point of view who's willing to punch you in the face for his own gratification just by talking to him. But you can certainly make it known to everybody around, if there's anybody around, that you don't agree with it and you're not going to stand for it. And quite often, met with that kind of resistance, your average predator or bully will probably back down because they can't handle that kind of thing. As Mike Tyson says, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And it's true. And if you can pick up on the early cues, like we discussed, recognize the monkey dance or the aggression ladder as they take the steps up the aggression ladder, usually recognize the body language, the verbal cues, the unanswerable questions, like who you're looking at and all that kind of thing. You recognize all these earlier and then deal with it however you see fit. My way of dealing with it when I was in a confrontation like that, and yeah, I have been in a lot of confrontations. I'm not a big guy. I'm a little guy. You would never pick me to be a bouncer. But then again, some of the best bouncers I know didn't look like big, hurly-burly guys. My very first sensei was Frank Vernon. Frank was average height, average build. He was also one of the founder members of the KUGB. He was their first team manager. Frank had polio as a child, and he had a withered leg. I think it was his left leg. It didn't stop him being one of the most effective and feared bouncers all around Liverpool. He worked lots of clubs, Russell's, the She, Cream, all of these clubs, Billy Joe's. He was very effective, and he could move like you wouldn't believe. He knew how to use his body, develop power through karate techniques. He was just one of those people. He ran a mind-in service with Ronnie Colwell way back in the early 70s. Now, a lot of people know Ronnie Colwell. He got a kind of a big reputation around Liverpool. In fact, I even saw a little exhibit to him in the Liverpool Museum down by the Pier Head the last time I was in Liverpool. Is it deserved? I don't know. I've met the guy a few times and spoke with him and, done classes with him. And it's all a matter of opinion, I guess. Some people think he's fantastic, or we went over to Japan, trained with all sorts of these people, but I don't know who he trained with in Japan, to be honest with you. I know he had a mind-in service with Frank, and I used to ferry them around in my cab quite a lot, from job to job. I know they had one job looking after the lead singer from, I think it was the Seekers. The Seekers, they had a big hit in the 60s and 70s. She had a big house in Sefton Park, gym in the basement, all that stuff. Top star. Anyway, they were doing a mind-in service for her. So they had a good reputation around celebrities that needed a little bit of protection. And this was before major security services came in and you needed, your armed guards and all that. So anyway, that's what Frank did and Ronnie did. And as I say, Frank was physically handicapped, certainly more so than the normal guy. But his whole attitude, I believe, got him through his training, got him to where he was. When I started training with Frank, he was Sandan, third dan. And it was one of my first clubs up in Prescott at the community centre there. We had Ronnie Colwell come in there a few times. And we also had Anoida Sensei come in there a few times. First time I ever got to see a Japanese instructor. Blew me away. Absolutely thought it was amazing. Anyway, from there, Frank advised me to go down the Triangle. And I picked up my training at the Triangle. But beside the point, there was a few people that used to work the doors who did training, Gary Spears and Terry O'Neill. Gary Spears was a pretty imposing guy. Terry didn't look that imposing back then, although he did build himself up. Ended up being in movies, as everybody knows, and famous bodybuilding, and turned out to be one of the top martial art actors in the UK. But at that time, no. He was just a lad who worked the doors down in Liverpool along Victoria Street, places like that. But what gave them their success was their mental attitude. This is what I wanted to get across. Mental attitude is everything. If you don't have any technique whatsoever, it's going to be your mental attitude that will get you through it. Or one of my mottos has always been, always let people know what you'll stand for and let them know what you won't stand for. And this will get you by. I'm not going to say it'll always get you respect, but it'll get you a reputation, and hopefully, you'll be able to live up to your reputation. So, just finishing up with Kumite, as I say, I learned a lot of my competition and the Japanese philosophical attitude to Kumite from Nishiyama Sensei. A little bit from Anoida, but Anoida and modern-day JKA in general teach you more how to develop power in your techniques. They will show you how to turn fast, how to develop power. Teaching timing is harder. We can do drills for it all the time, okay? Look out for early movement, try some fakes, there's different techniques that you can try. Shizoe was, all of these kind of techniques. Now, most of the techniques were analysed, all right? I think the Kumite was analysed more by Nishiyama than probably any other Japanese instructor. And I used to do camps down at La Jolla in California. From the first time I came over, I couldn't find an instructor around Alberta, Western Canada, and I asked Sensei Hanratty, what should I do? And he said, go see Nishiyama. I said, but he's in LA. He said, so go see him. It didn't look far when you looked on a map, but it was like almost 3,000 miles away, so 3-hour flight. But I took it into my mind that that was what I was going to do. I mean, you just did what your sensei said then, or you took it, you admitted that he was giving you the best advice he could, and you took it as the best advice that was available. And so I went down to La Jolla camp, and I did every camp all the way through the 80s until we parted company with Nishiyama for different reasons, certainly not for karate reasons. And the camps were amazing. It was a week-long camp. You lived on campus at the university, Southern California, and the camps were amazing. He brought different people in. He brought Hanratty in almost every year, so I got to, meet up with Sensei Hanratty again and again. Sensei Shirai, who I'd trained with previously in Crystal Palace. Just lots of really good instructors. And Sensei Shirai, probably one of the smoothest moving karate people at that time. They, to my mind, were the first generation instructors that came through from the JKA Instructors School, which Nishiyama was instrumental in founding and instructing at. And Nishiyama admitted to me, in fact, I think I put it in an article I wrote for Terry O'Neill's Fighting Arts, that originally the Japanese just did how you did a technique. All they wanted to do was how you did the technique. And when it kind of came across to the Westerners, they wanted to know why. And so it put a whole different aspect on the training in the instructor school at that time, and they started to figure out why certain people are very effective at Kumite and other people who maybe have fantastic technique are not as effective at Kumite. And there's lots of different things, right? There's reaction timing, there's target, there's speed of movement. All of this comes into your Kumite practice. So, there's so many more variables involved in the practice of Kumite than there are in, say, Kata and Kihon, obviously. But the big variable that people tend to ignore is the psychological one. When you put somebody in front of you, there's lots of psychological variables. Besides the fact that he's going to, try to punch your head off, the things you have to consider are distance, Mahai, right? And Mahai is kind of subtle. Everybody has their own personal space. And the way I explain it to my students is if you're going home on a bus late at night and there's nobody on the bus, right? And then somebody gets on, all the empty seats there, and they come up and sit next to you, you're not going to feel comfortable. You're immediately going to raise your awareness level, or you're going to start to shrink, or you'll get embarrassed. At that point, I would probably say, go find another seat, pal. The bus is empty. Now, a lot of people might not do that. They may, he just wants company or whatever. Not my kind of deal. Once you're in my personal space, I'm going to let you know. And I think most bouncers and most fighters would agree with me that once somebody gets within your personal space, depending on their attitude, right, then it's time for action. Now, the other analogy I have with Kumite is, imagine you're on a date. First time you're at a date, lovely girl or whatever your preference is, you're kind of like a little distance apart and you're shy, right? And then you kind of move a little closer and figure out where the mutually agreeable no man's ground is. And then from there, you can go either way. You either get knocked back or you can move in closer. And all of this, and reading body language, personal space, is just a way of communicating. It's a way that people and animals communicate, right? You see a dog sitting in your yard, you're walking past the dog, and as long as you're walking outside the fence, it doesn't do anything. The minute you touch the fence, the dog starts barking at you because you've invaded his personal space. We all see this, right? It's very territorial. So it's a way of communication. Now, to me, violence is a way of communicating as well. And whether you're doing it in sport, basically all you're doing is practicing for when it does get real, okay? It doesn't really mean anything because it's not real. There's rules and you can keep to them or not keep to them. If you don't keep to them, you get thrown out, okay? And the ref's there usually to protect the fighters. So get on to another of my pet peeves in a moment. But basically, that's one of the first psychological things in Kumite is the distance, okay, Mahai. When you study Mahai, you have to really have a good think about it and what's your personal space, what isn't. When is the time for action and when isn't it? Also, at what point can you launch an effective attack if you have to attack? And this is more in a competition arena than anything else. So if you're going to launch an attack out in the street, you're going to launch it straight away. You're not going to launch it from 20 feet away. You don't make it. But you get close enough and then you're going to go. And you're going to close that distance as fast as you can. Hopefully you'll freeze him and his reaction time's going to be a little bit slower and you'll complete your technique and nullify the situation. If not, then you might have a little bit of a rumble on your hands. But that is the first indication. So we're looking at distance. Then you got timing, all right, and reaction to movement or reaction to any kind of technique that's thrown your way or any kind of instigation, if you like, okay? You're still reading body language, how he's going to move, okay, which if you've got any sense, you're watching which way he's putting his face, he's leaning back, might be a headbutt coming, okay? Bring your elbow up as fast as you can, pushing forward, kind of leaning into it. There's either a punch or a kick coming. Kick's easy to spot. Usually an untrained fighter doesn't kick as fast as a trained fighter or a guy who's done some training, but they can still hurt you, all right? And they don't have to do a high kick. Most effective kicks in the street fights are low kicks. Hard kicks to the shin, sweeps, kicks to the thigh. Everybody's watched UFC these days, and you know that you can drop somebody with a good low kick. You don't have to be able to kick somebody in the head. When you do, and if you're very good at it, it comes as a complete surprise. I once saw Terry O'Neill do Uramawashi to a guy's head outside a club, and nobody knew what had happened because Terry was that fast. The guy fell on the floor, absolutely out. Everybody thought he was unconscious because he just dead on the floor. In fact, I think there may have even been a bit of a legal follow-up to that, but they couldn't prove that it was Terry's kick that did anything. But that was his one of his favourite kicks, and he wouldn't tell you he'd do it, he'd just do it, okay? And that was how he could work. He was extremely fast kicker, one of the fastest I've seen. Him and Frank Brennan, quite a few others, of course, like George Best and Ronnie Christopher. They were all very fast with their kicks. They probably kick faster than I can punch. But this all comes from recognising the situation and your reaction time. So, as I mentioned on the last podcast, reaction time is relatively slow for humans compared to, say, cats or other animals like a mongoose or something like that. They run rings around you before you know it's there. So, the variables that you have mostly psychological. Just standing in front of somebody, you're going to feel their presence. You don't know what they're going to do, so there's a little uncertainty factor. And you better have your confidence level up so that you can deal with whatever's coming. If you're not confident, you're going to succumb to whatever's going to be thrown at you. You either freeze or you'll react, okay? Either way, you're probably too late. So if you're blocking, if you're in a confrontation and you have to block the first technique, then you are too late. You should have thrown the first technique. I don't care what you say, 80% of fights are won by the person who throws the first technique. Of course, if it's on target. And that's another consideration that we have to look at when we're doing Kumite. And looking at Kumite as opposed to confrontation in the street or something like that, one other important point that a lot of people don't mention is Zanshin. You cannot afford not to have awareness out in the street. Just because the guy's on the floor doesn't mean he's not going to be able to hurt you. So you always have to be aware of your opponent's ability to hurt you or one of his friends or whatever. So Zanshin is something that you don't see in modern day Kumite. The guy who thinks he scored a point is running around with his hands in the air or jumping up and down and hoping that the referee's going to keep the guy on the floor so he doesn't get up and batter him. And believe me, a lot of people who get scored on in Kumite could come back and mess you up, all right? So you're relying on the referee to win the fight for you, which comes to my other point. I was watching an old JKA tape. I've got hundreds and hundreds of them, and the fights, like, I got my favourite fighters, like Yahara and Kokobon, Tanaka. They're all good fighters. At one time or another, I noticed they've all gone in a little hard. And what they've done is they've gone in hard and they've dropped their opponents, and then the opponent has won by losing. I totally disagree with that. I don't think anybody should win by losing. That's what made such a mess of the last Olympics and karate's introduction into it, if you want to call WKF karate. To me, it's not karate. They're trying to iron out all the differences in kata so that kata is just kata. It's not a style. And when you look at it, basically, your kata defines what style you're doing. Because Kumite certainly doesn't. Everybody looks the same doing Kumite. But kata defines the style. Now they're trying to take the style out of kata and even introduce Kion into competition, which, never mind, that's just my opinion. I'm getting old. As I say, at one time or another, everyone, top fighters who I like, Akamoto, all of these guys, they've always gone in full bore. And you'll find that when they've gone in full bore, when the contact is made, and I've watched Frank Barron get knocked back for overly contacted, the other guy has either stood stock still, right, so there's no reaction, he hasn't read the opponent coming at him, or he's on his way in, all right, and he's totally unprotected. So there's a term that I always instruct my officials to look for, and it's called Mabobi, which means undefended. Okay, you're not doing enough to defend yourself. And in boxing, or any boxing match, in fact, I think they do it in UFC as well, you'll always hear the ref say, defend yourself at all times. This isn't just an idle phrase. This is something that you really have to have on your mind, whether you're in competition, kumite, or you're in a street fight. Defend yourself at all times. That doesn't mean running in and hope the guy gets disqualified because he hit you for running in, all right? Or you didn't react fast enough and boom, you got nailed, okay? It's all very well saying, oh, well, he should have had control and, he should have had that. But some of the most beautiful techniques I've seen have been the ones that spot on target and drop the other guy. I don't think you should be penalised for that at all. Now, if you don't want to give him the fight, fair enough, call it no contest or whatever. But he certainly shouldn't be granting the guy a win because he got nailed. That's just my opinion. So, Kumite and street fighting, different psychological outlooks. And remember, you don't need an ounce of training to be good at street fighting. You just need a different mental attitude. Now, whether it's a right or wrong mental attitude, you haven't got time to discuss it, okay? It's not an argument. And as I said before, violence is a way of communicating. It might be the ultimate way of communicating. Now, lots of people will tell you it's wrong, but lots of governments will go out and bomb somebody just to prove that they're right. So this is violence, right? And you can condemn it all you like, but you're not going to get rid of it. So you might as well get good at it, and you might as well be able to recognize it and deal with it. And the best way to do that is get yourself into a good karate club, preferably Shotokan, because that's what I deal with. And as I said before, there's nothing as good Shotokan, but there's lots of other ones as well. And try to build up the attitude that your instructor is hopefully putting across to you, all right? I know some of them are only it for money, but hopefully you'll recognize them pretty early on and find one that's reputable. Look at the lineage, where they're coming from, what they've done, who they've trained under, and hopefully you'll benefit from it. I think you'll benefit from it. I've certainly benefited in my life from the training that I've done and the people I've trained with. Okay, so that's enough on Kumite or fighting or whatever you want to call it. Next, I would like to discuss a whole bunch of different instructors that I've been with, and I'll probably do a session on that in the near future. Till then, take care, keep on training, and as usual, any questions, queries, comments, let me know.